I like data, and when I trade, I always want to know what's my chance of having a good setup. So I tested my signal hundreds of times, and here's what I found. Basically, what I wanted to know is how reliable is basically my very first signal on a particular session. Well, because if we look at the Monday, there is pretty much a losing trade. Overall, the setup not being as much reliable. But if we go on a Friday, well, we were printing all day long. And pretty much the same on a Thursday and also Wednesday as well. But what I wanted to basically see is how reliable is my very first signal. Basically that very first momentum that I got to see. But as far as I've seen and traded this signal, I've noticed that so many times I tend to avoid the first signal and rather hop in on the opposite direction or just waiting for some continuation. But based on my previous experience, I can basically turn a red trade into a winning day, because most of the time if the first signal is not reliable, well, during that period we will have a little bit more signals to trade. And because few months ago I was a little bit hesitant to take a first trade or first signal, so I run pretty much simple backtest to see how reliable these signals are and what is my overall win rate, but also if I happen to see a runner, how often I'm gonna get 2, 3 or 4 hour trade. Meaning if I have this 1 hour signal right here, how often we will go to the 2 hour, 3 hour and so on. This way maybe I can structure my trades a little bit better than I used to, and depending on the condition, based on my prop firm challenge, I can trade accordingly. So if we look overall data, there is basically 70 or 67% win rate when it comes to these very first signals, which I would say is actually pretty surprising. I had way lower expectations, and as far as I've seen, the worst was basically here, basically December, well, pretty much around the holidays or the Christmas. I assuming the market has been a little bit choppy, we can look at it, but that was basically the worst losing streak, which is for losing trades or losing signals rather, which to be fair, it's actually not that bad. And I believe the very next week there was literally 7 winning streak. Now when I divide it into each month, now we're actually getting something a little bit interesting, because basically September there were 2 trades, but October has been phenomenal, literally phenomenal. Most of the time, as you can see here, we won 73 or 74% of the time, and actually 60% of the time we get to our trade. But moving to the November, that was pretty much the worst month, and I believe that was the time where I stopped being a little bit more confident in basically trading the very first signal, which looking at the statistics right here, it perfectly makes sense. So if we just look, for instance, November 14, on November 14 we can easily see that the very first signal was a losing one, but then we got a really nice winning streak or winning signals. So these 2 pieces of information alone makes my trading a little bit more confident, I would say, nowadays, because I'm confident that most of the time if I happen to take a losing trade, well, I can call it a day, because the data showing me that overall over a period of time I will still having a positive outcome. But if I happen to see a clean trade, I can make my trade or my losses, I can put myself into the winning day eventually. Obviously it's not gonna be all the time, because sometimes the market can be really tough to read, but most of the time it would be rather easy as long as I'm gonna stay calm. Maybe in this particular case, if I happen to see a clean push to the downside right here, I would probably wait a little bit more to see if we will have another follow through to the downside, because overall if this signal would be, for instance, right here, I would feel much more confident and comfortable to basically take a trade for 40 pips to take out these lows, because based on my structure, based on my framework, this signal would make much more sense than this one. On the flip side, if I see a really strong V-shape breaking the structure to the upside, obviously we don't want to continue lower, so this is also a rather no-brainer signal. Also in this case scenario, if I feel really uncomfortable to take a trade because there is a huge gap between or below, I got another strong signal right away, and basically I can ride the momentum to the upside. Even though I would miss the very first trade, the second one, ride the momentum, and if I happen to trail the stop loss, I would be probably stop out somewhere around, let's say 80 pips or 80 points, which overall these two trades would put me in a winning trade or winning day, and I would be more than happy to just walk away. Now, since I know what is my win rate and basically what I can expect from that signal, I was actually very curious. If I happen to take a winning trade, how often we gonna go for 2, 3, and 4 hour trades? So if I filter only just a winning trade, I can basically see that out of these 68 trades, 80% of them went basically for 2 hours, which overall that's actually crazy stats. So now we obviously know this was a losing one. Let's see what is the previous day. And if we zoom in, well, the previous day would give me that 2 hour trade. To be completely fair, this actually looks very similar to the Friday, but in this case scenario, there would be basically a phenomenal day, because from the very first signal, as we basically breaking this structure low, we are running 150 points. Obviously, I will never be able to catch perfectly the entire move, because let's be real, that's not even point here. Let's say I would be just trailing the stop loss, and somewhere maybe around here 100 points I would get stopped out. I could risk a portion of the previous profit to take a trade right here, and let's say I would lose it right here. And because it's still within my trading window, I could take another trade and took a winning trade that would eventually cover my previous loss. So overall it would be actually, let's say, 100 points on this day, which technically would be a great example why I usually like to trade at the very first let's say 30 minutes or so, because that's usually my very sweet spot when it comes to catching some really nice trade. I just always need to repeat myself. I'm here to just take a few points and moving on to another day, because eventually this is a long-term game, and as long as I keep having a good momentum at the very beginning, I'm more than confident that this system will gonna help me in the long run.